All right, so we've defined variables before, but now I want to define vectors. So a vector is going to be a variable that is going to have multiple values. So it's essentially going to be, again, what's called a vector. So for example, I could define a vector with the following command. So I can say x, which is going to be my vector, is going to be a vector that goes from 1 in steps of 1 to 100. So this is the manual way to define a vector. And one thing that I want to show you as well is that in MATLAB you can type comments, and that's oftentimes useful for documentation purposes. So if you want to type a comment, meaning a comment is something that you can put in the command window as code, but does not get executed. So it's something that you write that gets saved in the commands, but it's not an actual command that is going to get executed by MATLAB. It's just a comment. So to do that, you can type the percentage sign, so this sign over here, and then you can type the comment. And notice that the color changes as well. So I can say here then, for example, that this is going to be a vector from 1 to 100 spaced by 1. So essentially I'm saying this command over here, x equals 1 colon 1 colon 100 semicolon, what that's going to do within MATLAB is it's going to define a vector that goes from 1 to 100, and it's going to be spaced by 1. So essentially it's going to be a vector that has a value of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, all the way to 100. So if I click enter here, again, everything that is after the percentage sign is just a comment. It's not a command. And again, that's useful because if somebody else is looking at your code and at your MATLAB commands, then that helps them know what you were thinking and what you were trying to achieve. So it's always good practice to type comments in your code as well. All right, so now again, I typed a semicolon at the end of this command. So MATLAB executed the command, but it didn't give me the result for x. And you can see that here on the right that I have my variable x, which in this case is a vector, and is a 1 times 100 double. So it's a vector with 100 points essentially. Now, if I want to see what x actually is, I can just type x without a semicolon at the end and hit enter. And now MATLAB is going to tell me, okay, these are the values for x columns 1 through 100. And these are the values. So again, x would be essentially a 1 by 100 matrix that has the following values, so 1 through 100. I could have said as well, and let me actually clear the commands so that it's at the top. So I could have said as well 1, or rather x equals 1 to, let's say, to 200 and steps of 2. So again, when I type this command, this means x goes from 1, so this number over here, to 200 in steps or intervals of 2. So I can hit enter, and now I can type x, and again, now this gives me the results. So you can see here that again, we go from 1 all the way to 100. So the vector has 100 points, and they're in steps of 2. So you can see here that it goes 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, 11, all the way to 200 or 199 in this case, since we started from 1. So that's a way to define a vector manually. Let me clear commands again. And again, when I click clear commands over here, that does not clear the workspace. It just simply clears the commands over here. And I'm doing that just so that everything's at the top and it's easier for you to see. But now I can say, okay, if I defined that vector x that goes from, again, it went from 1 to 199 and it had 100 points, I can also extract the different columns from that vector. So again, let me just type x again, and columns 1 through 100 go 1, 3, 5, 7. So let's say that I'm trying to extract this number, number 9. In other words, the column number 5. So again, this is column 1, column 2, column 3, column 4, and column 5. So if I'm trying to extract column 5, and let me click commands again, I can say x parentheses 5. And again, x is a vector that has 100 points. So what this command is saying is I want to extract the 5th point in that vector. So if I hit enter, then the result is 9 as we saw previously. So again, remember that the columns go 1, 3, 5, 7, 9, all the way to 199. So that's the way, once you've defined a vector, to extract certain columns within that vector. All right, a couple more things that I want to show you is 2 more ways that we can define a vector. One is using what's called the linear spacing command. So if I type x equals lin for line and then space and then type 1, 10. And the other thing too is notice here that when you type a command that MATLAB recognizes, and I can type here 1, now it's starting to give me options, and you can go here to where it says more help, and that's going to bring up the documentation for that specific command. In this case, it's the command called line space, and you can see here that it says generate linearly spaced vector, and then it gives you the explanation over here of how that works. But essentially this line spacing command, what it does is it creates a vector with 100 points between the 2 points that you're defining. So for example, if I say linear space 1, 10, and let me actually put a comment over here, that's going to be a vector with 100 points between 1 and 100. So by default, when I say linear space or when I use that command, that's gonna take, okay, which 2 boundaries are you defining? In this case, 1 to 10, and by default, it's gonna create a linearly spaced vector with 100 points. So let's see how that works. If I hit enter now, you can see again here that we go columns 1 through 100. And I've defined that I want my vector to be going from values of 1 to values of 10. So it starts over here at 1 and it ends at 10. And then what MATLAB does is it says, okay, if you want to go from 1 to 10, I'm going to take 100 points between those 2 points. So between 1 and 10 in this case, and that's what your vector is going to be. So you can see here that we go 1 and then 1.09, 1.18, 1.27, all the way to 9.9091 and 10. So again, what MATLAB did is it took 1 and 10, which are the 2 boundaries that we've defined with the command over here, and it created points between those 2 boundaries, 100 points, that is, between those 2 boundaries, linearly spaced. So in other words, the difference between point 1 and point 2 is the same as the difference between point 2 and point 3, and 3 and 4, and so on and so forth, meaning they're linearly spaced. Now let me clear this. And again, notice here that it says X is a 1 by 100 double. Now I could also say I don't want 100 points, I want maybe less points. So I can say X equals, again, the same command, linear space, still 1 to 10. But now, instead of taking the default of 100 points, I only want, let's say, 10 points. Or let's do 20 points. And semicolon. And now notice how this workspace now is going to change. So now is a 1 by 20 double. The reason behind that is, again, that I've said I want a linearly spaced vector between 1 and 10, so the same as before, but instead of doing 100 points between those 2 points, I only want 20 points. I don't want 100 points. So you can also define how many points you want between those 2 boundaries. If you don't define how many points, then by default, MATLAB assumes that you want 100 points and it creates a vector with 100 points. If you define it though, then it's going to be whatever you define, in this case 20 points. So in other words, now if I say x equals, or rather x enter, you can see that it goes columns 1 through 8, 9 through 16, 17 through 20. So 20 different values, again, between my two boundaries, 1 and 10. Now, same thing over here. If I wanted to extract, let's say, the third point, so this one over here, I could say x3, and that's going to give me the value of the third column. In this case, 1.9474. So this number is this number. All right, so you can also do, instead of doing a linearly spaced vector, you can do a logarithmically spaced vector. Now, actually, before we do that, if you want to find more help about the command that we just used, you can simply type help and then type the command. So lin space in this case, and hit enter. And then MATLAB is going to give you just brief help on what that command is doing. All right, so again, the next thing that I want to show you is how to create a logarithmically spaced vector instead of linearly spaced. So actually, let me type help, and the command is called log space. So you can see here that MATLAB gives us the explanation. It says log space, logarithmically spaced vector, log space, and then x1, x2 would be the values that we would enter for the command. And then it says generates a row vector of 50 logarithmically equally spaced points between decades 10 to the x1 and 10 to the x2. So in other words, if I type the command log space and I say 1, 10, what that's going to do is it's going to create a vector with 50 points logarithmically spaced between 10 to the 1 and 10 to the 10. So not between 1 and 10, but rather between 10 to the number that you put in over here. So in this case, it would be 10 to the 1, which is going to be 10, and then 10 to the 10, or 10 to the power of 10, in other words. And I actually forgot to say x equals over here. So now if I type x, again, it's 50 points, not 100 points like a linearly spaced command. So you can see that we go columns 1 through 50. And it goes 1 e to the plus 10. So 1 times 10 to the 10. And then it starts at 0 and it goes all the way to 1. So in other words, what it did is, again, it created a vector with 50 points between logarithmically spaced between 10 to the 1 and 10 to the 10. Now we can do the same thing that we did for the line space command, and that is that we can say x equal log space 1, 10, and instead of taking the default, which in this case is 50, we can say maybe just 5. We just want 5 points. So now if I hit x equals, you can see that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 points only. We don't have 50. So the default for the line space command is 100 points. For the log space command is 50 points. And again, if you want more help, you can simply type help and then the command log space, and MATLAB is going to give you just some quick explanation of what that command does. All right, so I also want to show you, if you want even more help, you can go over here to help and documentation, and that's going to bring up the documentation window for MATLAB, and you can go here to MATLAB and go here to functions, and this is going to be a list of all the MATLAB functions. So you can go then here and search for the command that we were just using, log space, and just kind of search for that. You can see that over here, and if I click on that, now this is a thorough explanation of what that command exactly does. So you can do that for any command, and again, a list of all the commands is here. So this is all the different commands that you can use within MATLAB, and of course there's probably thousands or at least hundreds of commands over here that you can use, and we're just using a few of them. But here you can see a list of all the available functions rather that you can use within